For years, my family seemed like the perfect picture of harmony. My brother, a successful businessman, and I, a hard-working mother of two, always stood by each other through every challenge. But when my brother finally confessed his deepest secret, that he had been hiding a relationship with my best friend for years, it shattered my world. At first, I thought that would be the hardest thing to bear, but then came the real bombshell. I found an old letter hidden in my mother's things, one that revealed a part of her life I never knew about. She had been involved in a secret affair with a powerful man from the past, a man I was certain I had met years ago. The truth that unraveled from there turned everything I believed about my family upside down. Was I truly the child of my father? Or had my mother been hiding more than just her own secrets? If you want to know what my brother's confession revealed and how discovering my mother's hidden past changed everything I thought I knew about my identity, hit that like button and subscribe now. Comment below about a family secret that changed your life. This story will shake you. Let's begin. My name is Victoria Hartwell, and I need to tell you about the year that dismantled everything I believed about my family, my identity, and the very foundation of who I thought I was. This story begins with my brother's shocking confession about a secret relationship, but it ends with discovering truths about my mother's past that made me question whether the man I called father was actually my biological parent. Sometimes the secrets families keep aren't just about protecting feelings. They're about protecting entire identities built on carefully constructed lies. I grew up in what appeared to be the perfect upper-middle-class family in Westchester County, New York. My father, Robert Hartwell, was a respected corporate attorney who provided well for our family and maintained an impeccable reputation in our community. My mother, Elizabeth, was the epitome of grace and elegance, involved in charity work and social circles, always perfectly dressed and composed. My older brother, Andrew, was the golden child, brilliant and ambitious, who built a successful career in commercial real estate by his early 30s. I was the younger child by 4 years, and while I never quite matched Andrew's spectacular achievements, I built a good life for myself. I married my college sweetheart David at 26, had 2 beautiful children, Emma now 12 and Lucas 9, and worked as a high school English teacher, a career I found genuinely fulfilling, even if it wasn't as prestigious as my brother's business empire or my father's law practice. Our family had always been close, at least on the surface. We gathered for holidays and birthdays, maintained weekly Sunday dinners at my parents' house, and presented a united front to the world. There were no dramatic conflicts or obvious dysfunctions. We were, by all external measures, a functional and loving family. My best friend since college was a woman named Rachel Morrison. She and I had been inseparable for 15 years, sharing everything from career anxieties to parenting struggles to the mundane details of daily life. Rachel was single by choice, focused on her career as a marketing executive, and had been a fixture in my family's life for over a decade. She attended our holiday gatherings, was beloved by my children who called her Aunt Rachel, and had a friendly relationship with everyone in my family, including my brother Andrew. That's why what happened next felt like such a profound betrayal on multiple levels. It was a Saturday in October when Andrew asked if he could come over to talk to me privately about something important. This wasn't unusual. Andrew and I had always confided in each other about significant life decisions. I assumed he wanted to discuss a business opportunity or perhaps relationship advice, as he'd recently ended a 3-year relationship with a woman our parents had loved. Andrew arrived at my house mid-morning, looking uncharacteristically nervous. David took the kids to their soccer games, giving us privacy, and Andrew and I sat in my living room with coffee while he worked up the courage to speak. "I need to tell you something," he started, "and I know it's going to hurt you, but I can't keep hiding it anymore. I've been seeing someone for the past 2 years, someone you know very well." My first thought was that he was dating someone inappropriate, maybe a married woman or someone significantly younger. I wasn't prepared for what came next. "It's Rachel," he said quietly. "Rachel and I have been in a relationship for 2 years. We're in love, and we're planning to move in together." I stared at my brother, unable to process what he'd just said. Rachel, my best friend of 15 years. Andrew, my brother. Together, secretly, For 2 years, while I'd been confiding in Rachel about everything in my life and spending time with both of them separately, without any idea they were involved. "You've been dating Rachel for 2 years, and neither of you told me?" I finally managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "We wanted to," Andrew said. "We almost told you so many times, but we were afraid of how you'd react, afraid it would damage your friendship with Rachel or your relationship with me. We thought if we waited until we were sure it was serious, it would be easier. But the longer we waited, the harder it became to confess." The betrayal was multi-layered and devastating. My brother and my best friend had been lying to me for 2 years, conducting a secret relationship while maintaining normal interactions with me as if nothing had changed. Every time Rachel had sat in my kitchen complaining about being single and lonely, she'd been lying. Every family dinner where Andrew and Rachel had politely chatted as acquaintances, they'd been lying. Every confidence I'd shared with Rachel, every family matter I'd discussed with Andrew, had occurred in the context of this massive deception. "How could you?" I asked, tears starting to fall. "How could both of you lie to me for 2 years? Rachel is my best friend. You're my brother, and you've both been deceiving me every single day." "I know," Andrew said miserably. "I know it's unforgivable, but we do love each other, Victoria. This wasn't just some casual thing we hid for fun. We genuinely fell in love, and we were terrified of losing you if we told the truth." "So you thought lying for 2 years was better?" I was getting angry now, the hurt transforming into rage. "You thought I'd be less hurt finding out you've been deceiving me for years than if you'd just been honest from the beginning." Andrew had no good answer for that, because there wasn't one. The conversation devolved into him apologizing repeatedly while I cried and raged about the betrayal. Eventually he left, and I was left alone trying to process that my brother and best friend had fundamentally violated my trust in ways I didn't know how to forgive. I confronted Rachel the next day. She came to my house and offered similar explanations. They'd fallen in love unexpectedly, hadn't meant to deceive me, had been scared of my reaction. She cried and apologized and begged me to understand, but I was too hurt and angry to offer forgiveness yet. Over the following weeks, I pulled away from both of them. I declined family dinners, ignored Rachel's calls and messages, and told David I needed space to process this betrayal. My parents were confused about why I was suddenly avoiding family events, but I wasn't ready to explain that their golden child son had been lying to everyone for years. About a month after Andrew's confession, I was at my parents' house to pick up some things I'd stored there. My mother was out at one of her charity committee meetings, and my father was at work. I was alone in the house, gathering boxes from the guest room closet where I'd stored old college textbooks and keepsakes. As I pulled boxes down from the high shelf, one tipped and spilled its contents across the floor. As I knelt to gather the scattered papers and photographs, I noticed an envelope that had fallen from a box that clearly belonged to my mother, not me. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, and addressed to Elizabeth in handwriting I didn't recognize. I knew I shouldn't read it. It was clearly my mother's private correspondence, not meant for my eyes. But I was still raw from Andrew's betrayal, still feeling like everyone in my family was keeping secrets, and I convinced myself I had a right to know what other lies I'd been living with. I opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of a letter dated from 39 years ago, the year before I was born. The letter was from someone named James Whitmore, and as I started reading, my hands began to shake. The letter was a love letter, passionate and intimate, from a man who was clearly deeply involved with my mother. James wrote about missing her, about the future they'd planned together, about how difficult it was to maintain their affair in secret given his public profile and her marriage. He referenced meetings at a hotel where they'd spent stolen afternoons, plans they'd discussed about potentially leaving their respective situations to be together, and his fears about the complications of his career and family, making such a dramatic change impossible. The letter was dated from August, 39 years ago. I did the math quickly in my head. I was born in May, 38 years ago. 9 months after this letter was written, my mother had given birth to me. I sat on the floor of my parents' guest room, holding this letter, and felt my entire identity begin to fracture. Was this James Whitmore my biological father? Had my mother been having an affair around the time I was conceived? Had my whole life been built on a lie about who I actually was? I looked through the rest of the box more carefully and found several more letters from James, spanning about 2 years, along with photographs of my mother with a man I didn't recognize but who I assumed was James. They were clearly intimate photographs, not sexual, but showing a couple who were obviously deeply in love. My mother looked younger and happier in these photos than I'd ever seen her, radiant in a way that made it clear this relationship had been significant to her. I also found what appeared to be a draft of a letter my mother had written but never sent, dated around the time the correspondence with James ended. In it, she wrote about ending their relationship because she was pregnant and couldn't be certain whether the child was James's or Robert's. She wrote that she'd chosen to stay with Robert for the sake of her marriage and her son Andrew, and that she couldn't risk destroying her family even though leaving meant losing the love of her life. I was that child. The pregnancy that had ended my mother's affair was me, and she hadn't been certain who my biological father was. I took photographs of everything with my phone, carefully replaced the items in the box, and left my parents' house in a daze. I drove home mechanically, my mind spinning with implications I wasn't ready to fully process. That evening, after David put the kids to bed, I showed him what I'd found. His reaction mirrored my own shock and confusion. "You need to talk to your mother," he said. "These are serious questions about your parentage and your family history. You can't just sit with this. You need answers." But I wasn't ready to confront my mother yet. First, I needed to know more about James Whitmore. I spent the next several days conducting obsessive internet research. James Whitmore had been a prominent businessman in New York, founder of a successful investment firm. He'd been married with 2 children at the time of his affair with my mother. He'd died 5 years ago from a heart attack at age 72. As I looked at photographs of James online, I saw undeniable similarities to my own features. We had the same eyes, the same nose structure, the same widow's peak hairline. When I compared photos of myself to photos of Robert Hartwell, my supposed father, the resemblance was far less clear. Robert and Andrew looked remarkably similar. They could never be mistaken for anything but father and son. But I'd always looked different from both of them, something I'd attributed to taking after my mother's side of the family. Now I wondered if I looked different because I wasn't Robert's biological daughter at all. The situation with Andrew and Rachel suddenly seemed almost trivial compared to this much more fundamental question about my identity. Who was I, actually? Was I Victoria Hartwell, daughter of Robert and Elizabeth? Or was I the biological daughter of a man named James Whitmore, who'd had an affair with my mother and died, without ever knowing I might be his child? 2 weeks after finding the letters, I finally confronted my mother. I called and asked her to meet me privately at a coffee shop, saying we needed to talk about something important. She agreed, probably assuming I wanted to discuss the situation with Andrew and Rachel, which the family now knew about and which had caused considerable tension. When we sat down with our coffees, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs I'd taken of the letters. I watched the color drain from her face as she recognized what she was seeing. "Where did you find these?" she asked quietly, her composed exterior cracking for the first time I could remember. "In a box in your guest room closet. Who is James Whitmore, Mom? And is he my biological father?" My mother was silent for a long time, staring at the photos on my phone. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know." "You don't know?" I repeated. "How can you not know?" "I was involved with James for about 2 years," she admitted. "It was an affair, obviously. I was unhappy in my marriage, and James was charismatic and exciting and made me feel alive in ways Robert never had. We talked about leaving our spouses and being together, but the logistics were complicated. James had a very public career, and the scandal would have been enormous. And I had Andrew to think about. And then you got pregnant with me," I said. "Yes, and I genuinely didn't know who the father was. Robert and I were still intimate occasionally, trying to make our marriage work. And I was seeing James regularly. When I found out I was pregnant, I had no way of knowing which man was the biological father." "So you just chose to assume it was Robert? You never told him about the uncertainty?" "I told James," my mother said. "That's what ended our relationship. When I told him I was pregnant and wasn't sure about paternity, he panicked. He said he couldn't risk a scandal, that if I tried to claim he was the father, he'd deny it and fight it legally. He said I should stay with Robert and raise the baby as Robert's child. And Robert? Does he know you were having an affair when I was conceived? No, my mother said. I never told him. I ended things with James, committed fully to my marriage, and Robert never knew I'd been unfaithful. As far as he knows, you're his biological daughter, and I've never told him anything different. So Dad has been raising me for 38 years, possibly not knowing I might not be his biological child. And I've been living my entire life not knowing who my actual father might be. I know, my mother said, tears starting to fall. I know I should have told you. I know I should have told Robert. But the longer I waited, the more impossible it became. And honestly, for a long time I convinced myself it didn't matter, because Robert was your father in every way that counted. He raised you and loved you, and never treated you differently than Andrew. Except I don't look like him or Andrew, I said, and now I know why. Have you looked at photos of James Whitmore recently? I look exactly like him, Mom. I have his eyes, his nose, his hairline. There's basically no physical resemblance between me and Robert, and apparently there's a reason for that. My mother looked at the photos I showed her of James Whitmore, comparing them to photos of me, and I saw recognition in her expression. You do look like him, she admitted. I've always seen it but tried not to think about what it might mean. So, what do we do now? I asked. Do we tell Dad? Do I get a DNA test? Do I try to contact James's family? How do I even process this? I don't know, my mother said helplessly. I've been avoiding this for 38 years. I don't have good answers. Over the following months, I went through one of the most difficult periods of my life. I decided to get a DNA test to definitively determine whether Robert was my biological father. My mother agreed to participate, though she was terrified of what the results might show and what it would mean for her marriage. The results came back, confirming what I'd already suspected based on physical appearance. Robert Hartwell was not my biological father. James Whitmore almost certainly was, though since he was deceased, I couldn't get direct confirmation without involving his other children, which I wasn't ready to do yet. I had to decide whether to tell Robert. This was perhaps the hardest decision I've ever faced. He'd been my father in every meaningful way for 38 years, raised me with love and dedication, and never treated me as anything but his beloved daughter. Did he deserve to know that I wasn't biologically his? Or would telling him only cause pain without accomplishing anything positive? I talked to therapists, to David, to a few trusted friends. Eventually, I decided that Robert deserved to know the truth, even if it was painful, because he'd been living a lie for decades and deserved to make informed decisions about his own life. I told him on a Sunday afternoon, just the two of us, in his study at my childhood home. I showed him the DNA results, explained about my mother's affair, and watched his world fall apart just as mine had months earlier. Robert's reaction was complex. He was devastated by the betrayal, angry at my mother for the decades of deception, and struggling with what this meant for his relationship with me. But he also made it clear, through tears, that regardless of biology, I was his daughter, and he loved me exactly the same as he always had. You're my child, Victoria, he said. I raised you from birth. I was there for every moment of your childhood. Biology doesn't change 38 years of being your father. But things did change, inevitably. Robert and my mother separated, unable to overcome the revelation that their entire marriage had been built on her deception. He filed for divorce after 42 years of marriage, unable to forgive or forget that she'd lied to him about something so fundamental. My relationship with my mother became strained and complicated. I understood intellectually that she'd made difficult choices in impossible circumstances, but I couldn't easily forgive that those choices had meant I'd lived my entire life not knowing who I actually was. The situation with Andrew and Rachel seemed almost absurdly trivial in comparison to these much larger revelations about family secrets and identity. I eventually reconciled with both of them, because their 2-year deception paled next to my mother's 38-year lie. Andrew and Rachel got married last year, and while our relationships aren't quite what they were before, we've rebuilt functional connections. I also reached out to James Whitmore's children, my half-siblings I'd never known existed. I contacted them carefully, explained the situation, and offered DNA testing to confirm our biological connection. They were shocked but ultimately welcoming, curious about this sister they'd never known about. I now have a relationship with two half-siblings and have been introduced to nieces and nephews I never knew existed. The most unexpected development was learning that James had left a significant estate when he died, and his children insisted that I should receive my share as his biological daughter. I inherited enough money to ensure my children's college educations would be fully funded, which was simultaneously generous and strange, coming from a biological father I'd never known. Looking back now, 3 years after Andrew's initial confession and 2 years after discovering my mother's letters, I understand that families are built on secrets far more often than we'd like to believe. Andrew's secret relationship with Rachel was the crack that started everything breaking open. But the real foundation-shaking revelation was discovering that my entire identity had been built on my mother's carefully maintained lie about my parentage. I've had to completely reconstruct my understanding of who I am. I'm no longer just Victoria Hartwell, daughter of Robert and Elizabeth. I'm Victoria Hartwell, biological daughter of James Whitmore and Elizabeth, raised by Robert Hartwell, who loved me as his own despite having no biological connection. My identity is more complicated than I ever imagined, composed of genetics and upbringing, and the complex truth that family is both biology and choice. Robert remains my dad in every way that matters. He chose to continue being my father even after learning we share no genetic connection, and that choice means more to me than biology ever could. But I also acknowledge James Whitmore as my biological father and have built relationships with his children, my half-siblings, which has expanded my understanding of family and identity. As for my mother, our relationship has been slowly healing. She made choices I can't fully condone, but I'm trying to understand them within the context of her circumstances and the limited options she felt she had. She was a woman in a difficult marriage who fell in love with someone else, got pregnant without knowing paternity, and made a choice to preserve her family at the cost of honesty. It wasn't the right choice, but I can understand the fears and pressures that led to it. The truth about my mother's past made me question everything I knew about family, identity, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Sometimes those stories are built on lies we don't even know exist. Sometimes discovering the truth destroys the foundation of your understanding. And sometimes you have to rebuild your entire sense of self from the ground up based on new information that changes everything. But through all of it, I've learned that identity is more flexible and resilient than I'd imagined. I'm still myself, still Victoria, even though the details of my biological origins are different than I believed for 38 years. I'm still a mother, still a wife, still a teacher, still a daughter and sister, even though the exact configuration of those relationships has shifted. My brother's confession changed everything by breaking the illusion of our perfect family and starting the cascade of revelations. But it was the truth about my mother's past, hidden in old letters in a closet, that truly made me question everything I knew. And in that questioning, in the painful process of reconstructing my understanding of family and identity, I found a more honest and authentic version of myself than I'd ever had the chance to be before. If this story moved you, if you've ever discovered family secrets that changed your understanding of yourself, smash that like button and subscribe. Share with someone navigating complicated family truths. Comment about a revelation that transformed your identity. Remember that family is both biology and choice, that truth matters even when it's painful, and that sometimes the stories we're told about who we are need to be completely rewritten based on information we were never given the chance to know.